Adept Performance is next. So we're going to go get a little bit deep and technical here. How many of you out there have had an implementation done by Synergis by Mr. Jeffery Newton? All right. Quite a few. So Jeffrey's here to talk about Adept Performance. Jeffrey travels. His life is heavily involves travel all over the United States and internationally, basically where the rubber meets the road. He's out there implementing Adept. What our development team creates, Jeffrey's out actually making it work in the field, working through the tough challenges, the unique process, workflow issues, interdepartmental issues, figuring out how to make Adept really sing for your company. Jeffrey just got back from Cairo. I think it was Friday or Saturday?
Saturday.
Yeah, Saturday night. So he's still recovering. He was in Cairo training a new distributor that we have there who's going to be covering basically North Africa and the Middle East. They've got a bunch of resellers as well. So part of our expansion efforts, Jeffrey was there for 2 weeks training their team. So please welcome Jeffery Newton.
Thank you. And where is the clicker?
Clicker here.
Okay.
Big guy.
Big guy. Okay, easy. So I'm going to start with, and I'm going to totally blame Cairo for this. I'm reading, because I could not get any of this to memory, but hopefully it's still informative up here. Anyways, good afternoon. I wanted to take a second in the spotlight here to say I really appreciate coming to Adept Experience. For me, it's a lot more of a reunion than a meet and greet, because as Scott pointed out, I've been with a lot of you, probably for a week or two already, hopefully not disturbing you too much. But for the rest of you, I've not had the pleasure to work with yet. Here's my obligatory bio slide. Yes, I'm that. Wait. No. That. I'm that Jeffery Newton. And yes, the hair, I do this just to get Martha. Every time she publishes something, I change the hair so all of her stuff's out of date. A senior applications consultant here at Synergis. In case you don't know what an applications consultant is, we're the team that makes everyone else's hard work for you. As a client, your first interaction with us is often right at a check-in call before we're about to come out and do some work. But we're often there behind the scenes ahead of that. We're there setting out requirements. We're gathering the information that we have over the years to sort of refine what we should be doing, how we should do it, how your systems are working, along with how our dev is saying what it should do, our interactions in the field and how it actually ends up working, as well as solving some of the things you come up with that aren't exactly standard. If you have questions ahead of time, they'll often come to us for that. So, as I like to say, we're kind of like farmers. We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. Okay. Here you can see some exciting facts about me. That's as of today. I actually calculated it. For some reason, our system tells me how many actual days I've worked for Synergis. A little over 13 years. I've been working directly for Synergis as an applications consultant. I've got 9 to 10 years ahead of that, working as a systems specialist for an engineering firm that actually implemented the day I started. They'd already picked it up, and I've run with it ever since. This does not include Cairo. This is miles I've flown. That's 44 times around this little blue marble to get to the places you guys call home to help you out. This one might be a bit of a fib. I don't know who the math geeks are. But really, this is how I feel it grows the number of how it's grown the number of people I meet. It just every year I gather more and more people that I've met in different places. So, the most exciting part about this job. So, as I get older, I realize I enjoy waxing nostalgic a lot more than I thought I would when I was, younger, listening to someone my age doing it. So, I'm going to wax nostalgic. Something that was often said to me when I was a brand new systems admin was, it's a lot easier to lose goodwill than earn it back. Simple, right? Don't screw up, and everyone will love you. But that's not exactly what I think my manager was trying to get across to me. It was a big part of it. He didn't want me screwing up. But the reality is, and the part I've leaned on the most over the years, is to not get discouraged when you take time to make fixes, to make things better, and your users don't instantly run back and tell you how great it is. If your users were like mine, then someday, when you're grabbing a coffee, someone might come up and say, you know, that Adept thing's not running too bad. Take that for the win it is. Because it took you and them a lot to get there. What we're going over are the things we see that cause issues for our clients in the past, and I may even admit to a thing or two that you're not doing that's necessarily wrong, but Adept struggles with. Now, even if you do every single one of these things, it is possible you will not see an obvious change, but sometimes any one of these can make a notable difference to a user's day-to-day experience, and by keeping on top of these tasks, you can definitely help prevent slowdowns from happening in the future. The important thing here is that all of these things you can and should feel comfortable doing. If at the end of this you take 4 or 5 of these ideas back and try them out, I think we'll have gotten our point across. Okay. We're going to start with one that many of you may not actually be able to do yourselves, but knowledge is power. And if you take this to your DBA, they'll be able to ensure the tasks are doable, or if nothing else, being done. As database maintenance requires a steady hand and a good understanding of what's going on, these are probably the last on your list of things you want to try without some sort of review with our team or yours to see how much they would likely help. Also, let me be upfront. All the last items are far more preventative than curative. So unless you're actually running into problems caused by your database server or that, you're more likely to prevent things from happening in the future than solving a problem right now. Okay, what do we got here? There are settings in SQL that decide how big your database starts out as, how big it's allowed to grow, and by how much it grows every time. The one with the most impact on us is how much it grows by. I think I already clicked. Anyways, we'll find out. You see, each time a database reaches its limit, SQL has to halt everything, assign some new space, and then catch up to all the commands that were coming in while it was halted. As you can imagine, too small of an increment, and it's constantly making these small pauses and updating the system. Too large, and while it won't happen often, you could see a very noticeable pause while it tries to reallocate that space. What you'll see, you'll see Adept completely pause. The system won't crash. Your commands will simply stop. You'll have to wait, and then everything will pick up again as if nothing happened. What do I got? Am I? Oh, I was supposed to be following. I apologize. You're supposed to be following the click. You saw that. Okay. And I went ahead too far back. Okay. As Adept only stores the system data and the metadata, not files and other information like that, our database doesn't swell very quickly. So by setting the database to grow anywhere from 10 to 20 meg at a time would be recommended. And it's a lot better than the 1 meg that it is by default. Of course, this auto growth can be avoided altogether. If you check and you know your database grows by about 60 gig every year, anytime you do system maintenance or you already have a shutdown, take the time to pop in, make sure the growth is maybe 100 gig more than what you know it's going to grow in the year, and let it sit there. Okay. The transaction log is as simple as it sounds and as scary complex as you may suddenly realize it must be. It's quite literally a sequential list of every single transaction that SQL has to make in order to get the database into its current shape. Picture the scenario where you have to make that peanut butter and jelly sandwich. If you've ever had to walk through this, you realize just how many steps there are actually in doing anything and how detailed they have to be to get to the end result. Now imagine how much actual data is being recorded to get all these steps done, or even something as simple as just the state of the loaf of bread. I mean, imagine you have to find the loaf of bread in the bread box, take 2 out of the loaf. The loaf is now empty, so find out if we get another loaf. return the loaf to the bread box. And again, how many people have done that? Have you done the whole, hey, let's explain how I have to go through a process, and someone brings you down to something that you do every day? What? That must be an American thing because we use them. Anyways, so when you do a full backup, you take a snapshot of all the relevant data. Loaf is in the bread box and it's full. That's all I care about at this point. However, that means you took the entire database backup and every setting and open item in it. You can instead utilize incremental backups. This says go to a time marker, probably the last backup, and only capture all the commands we did to get to this state currently. Now, while that's a lot of commands, it's going to be a fraction of the overall database size. If you ever have to restore from that, what happens is you restore your backup to the last full, and then SQL actually runs through every command as if a user had put it in and takes that transaction log as instructions and redoes everything to that point. So while they don't directly affect the performance of SQL, they can overburden a server's drive, tangentially impacting your overall performance. At best, you may see slowdowns when searching for files or when updating metadata, basically anything that accesses the database, or anything that reads and writes from the database. At worst, you could get an error because the server runs out of space. If you're one of the few who have a dedicated DBA and they use incremental backups, then we'll leave it up to them to manage their transaction logs, because they should already have a plan in place to take care of them. Sorry, I lost my thought. If, however, you manage to back up manually, if you manage your backups manually using SQL or a database packaging tool, say when you make changes, or using some other application to only do full backups on a schedule, there's probably no reason for keeping the transaction logs of any size. Now, you have a couple of options to manage these logs. The most straightforward way is to change your database mode. By setting your database mode recovery model to simple in SQL, so that anytime you take a backup, using SQL Management Studio, the log will be truncated automatically. The other options include manually shrinking your transaction logs or running a SQL script in Management Studio that truncates the logs for you. This is most often needed when you use a third-party application for backups, or back up the entire VM, or other options that don't trigger SQL, doesn't trigger SQL to do the transaction. And of course, please contact us on how and when to run either the script or the manual shrink, or ask for some database maintenance the next time we're coming in to do something. So Adept has an amazing feature where when we upgrade from one version to another, we create the entire new set of tables and migrate all of our legacy data into them. The upside is this allows us to quickly restructure tables if we design a new format or add data into them, and it also allows us a remarkably simple restore point in the likely event we ever need to roll back during a migration. Now, the half-life of these old tables is incredibly short, however. Realistically, once the system is opened up and the users are logging back in again, you would never roll back to this point, as the new tables are where all the new data is going. However, we often, just for peace of mind, recommend that you keep these for a few weeks, just so that you can go back and double check to make sure everything is as it is, often just proving to someone that that really is the data that was in the system before we did the migration. Out of sight and out of mind totally apply here. It's not uncommon to find 2 to 4 releases of Adept sitting in someone's database when we go in and do a migration. That's 2 to 4 entire copies of your database from that point in time just sitting there taking up space. Like transaction logs, Adept completely ignores these, but backups can be large and unwieldy, drive space can be filled, and data fragmentation can become an issue. Where am I at? So during your next outage, you can go into Designer, and under the Upgrade menu, locate Remove Old Versions. This will remove only the tables for the selected release that you see there. So if you see one of them open, it's a good idea to go in and click it. If those tables aren't found, the option to clear out the tables should be grayed out. So if you open it and they're all out, then you're okay. But if you do see that, go ahead and, when you're already down, go ahead and hit it. Don't worry about the data. It only gets rid of tables that aren't needed anymore and never touches the new tables. So while you're already there in Designer, take a moment to look at your audit trail. Adept by default records each and every action your users take. So unless you've gone in and turned off in your admin options and turned off something like log in, log off, or views, sorry, it records them unless you've done that. That has happened since you started. You've probably seen all this information in the document dashboard under the audit trail. Now this could be very handy when you need it. But most often, you never look at it. Or if you do, you're not looking back very far. To see, you're not really with all the data there, especially for a file that gets accessed quite often, we could have to queue up a lot of information each time we open the document dashboard for a given file. All this data also means your Adept database is getting bigger all the time, leading to the issues we've already covered. When you rolled out Adept, we created a second database called whatever your database name was, ARC. That's why we did this. We did this for just this occasion. So under Tools, you'll find the Archive Audit Trail utility. This utility allows you to select all specific types of commands or all commands for a range, then transfer them from the core Adept database to this ARC database. This means that all your log off data, view data, or information when a file was viewed 4 years ago gets moved to its own more static database, reducing the core database size and reducing the volume of information the document dashboard needs to load. But don't worry. All that information is still available if a user wants to see it in the document dashboard. They can choose an option to let them go and view the extra data, and always in your admin tool for searching your archive audit trail. Okay. Now for one that can solve any number of day-to-day issues. The repair database runs queries against some of the more repeatable issues we've encountered over the years. Problems like user settings not saving, or my favorite, when a file gets, when you get a duplicate copy of a record with the same GUID in a table, and because GUIDs are supposed to be unique, the file shows up twice in your search results, but Adept protects you and doesn't let you do anything with either copy. This will also clean out rogue temp tables. And again, I think this is one of the ones that's happening a lot less, so thank you whoever does that. But it'll also clean out those rogue temp tables and other data that's typically removed every time you restart the service, but sometimes because of a hung connection or an unexpected server outage, the tables will get left behind. Okay. So most of these do not return already used drive space to the system, nor does it compress or defragment the data on the drive. But it can help prevent struggling systems from choking outright by halting the new space that's being consumed for a while. Because it goes without saying, I'm going to make a point and say it. With any of these suggestions, ensure that you have recent tested backups before proceeding. Like every other database, like everything database related, the Nargles can change a simple cleanup into a panicked restore at the worst moment for you. One last thing, proper database maintenance is important. Databases have their own set of requirements and quirks. So especially if you do not have a dedicated DBA available, it would be worth it to have our team review the health of your database, including options I've only touched on, like defragmenting or re-indexing, as well as maybe the system performance as well to see where your slowdowns are on a database server. Okay, that was the one behind. That's okay. I'm fine. There are a few things here that Adept just does not like. These are often things that are done even knowing that there may be a price to pay for implementing this way. These are most often come from decisions made during the implementation that were the best for everyone at the time. So now would be the good time to see if your needs have changed and start to undo some of the things that might be redundant. You'd probably never think that the data card could cause slowdowns. It's just a bunch of empty fields. But are they? The volume of fields placed on a data card can slowly chip away at the speed in which the data card opens. And you may have seen this sometimes when switching cards after a very large search, where the card, on rare occasion, will actually fill in slowly. Take some time to remove cards and tabs that are not being used and prune down fields that are not being utilized. Remember that the database analysis report is a great way to see how often your fields are being filled out, but you will have to interview your user base to understand how often or what cards and fields they're not using for searching or entering data. And that one, and that one. When you remove a field from the data card, this does not remove the data from the system. These fields can still be searched using the quick search options and the search results tab by viewing and adding the field to your column set. Oh, I've gone ahead. Oh, no, another piece, okay. Many of you are probably using restricted lists. For those that don't recall what those are, these are a field that contain a static list of values added by the administrator. When using data entry, only the values already in the field can be entered into the data card, and not to be confused with related fields, which are a way of generating, I love this word, hierarchical relationships between field values. Restricted fields can impact performance of the data card as well as other commands when they get to be filled with too many entries. More than 200 line items in a drop-down list can start to add a small strain on load times of data cards. Add in 5 or 6 of such lists, and it becomes more noticeable. If you need that many or more entries, considering switching to related fields. But always make sure you talk to us before you do, because there are certain limitations that may not meet exactly what you're trying to do at the beginning. And now libraries. And I had to put Cairo in here because it's Library of Alexandria. So that's Library of Alexandria. Come on. Because so much of Adept is focused on security and what you can and can't do at any given moment, you should not be surprised to realize that almost every action involves files in the every action that involves files in the system requires Adept to go and make sure you're allowed to do it. To help speed this up, Adept does a very thorough check to figure out what locations you should and should not have access to during login. And this all takes time. So the more libraries you have, the longer this takes. Now, over the last years, we've made great strides to increase performance on our end, so where 4,000 libraries in the past could have been rather bothersome, a system today can handle 10 or 20,000 libraries before we really start to see that slowdown. But complacency is not our friend. The underlying issue still remains, a lot more work for the system than it might have otherwise needed to be doing, and not only that, but it can bog your users down with choices when you're checking in a new file, and unnecessary work for your admins managing the library rights and the workflows. And if you're still relying on libraries to find your data, it could be an indicator that your metadata is lacking. So what can you do? Delete empty libraries. The search for empty libraries has been around a long time. It's a tool that quickly identifies every library that is devoid of files and flags it with this little yellow cue card glyph. Use the command to get an idea of how big your problem is. As a companion to that is a great command called delete empty libraries, added late in 2017. This admin command will find all of those empty libraries, and as its name indicates, delete them. In the case where the top-level library is empty, but the libraries below it still contain data, Adept will convert the empty library to a folder, retaining all of your user rights and workflow settings and allowing them to continue to inherit. Please remember that the core reason Adept needs a library are access control and workflow. Notice I don't have to look at that to say that because I say that to everybody, access control and workflow. And in truth, replication. So, if you have sets of files clustered in different libraries, but your users access and process them all the same way, you could most likely place them in the same library. So in cases where your users are using libraries to find their fields or find their files, consider instead using an Adept field for this data so it can be leveraged by a file guide or a data card instead of the library itself. And of course, changing library settings to inherited. New changes we've made in the last years include the ability to have sub-libraries inherit its setting from its parent. The key advantage to this has been that Adept is able to process the writes that are needed and focus only on where they're specifically set, quickly grouping together all of the inherited libraries rather than having to record settings for each and every one. And I will say, for anybody who has a lot of libraries, I've seen this one cause the most performance gain in those things that seem to be library related. Getting into, especially as an admin, UGLA, when you record something, when you change something, it works so much faster if you set dead hair. Even so, if you look and all your writes are the same and they're set, just collapse them down and get them up to the top. Our CAD plugins do amazing things. They really are the workhorse plugin. Every file of almost any type that we store in Adept gets touched by one of these utilities. And when we overload them by giving them hundreds of scenarios they have to check, both check-in and work area updates can start to drag. As you know, one of the key jobs of the plugin is to seek out attributes and, if found, put that data into a predetermined Adept field. Well, every option it has to look for takes a couple of cycles to process. So if I have 10 or 20 borders that I used to use, that's 10 or 20 questions the plugin has to ask each and every document every time it changes. To be honest, 10 or 20 seems like a lot of blocks to me, but we can handle that no issue. The audience I'm really reaching out to are the folks who have 50 or 100 blocks still recorded in their list, most likely from the point where we implemented, and we're hoping to capture as much of that legacy data as possible. In many cases, you have new, modern, standard title blocks. Yes? You all change. Now that you have that data from all those files, it might be the right time to remove all those references to the legacy blocks and narrow your options down a bit. You don't have to worry because Adept won't go back and remove any data from files it's already extracted. And if you ever edit one of those files, most likely you're going to put the new title block in there, so that's the information it's actually going to be queuing off of. Work area performance issues appear mostly on login, check-in and check-out, or switching between them. Because most work areas are presumed by Adept, by their very nature, to be very dynamic, it updates them every time they're accessed. So here's a shift. While our libraries don't like to be spread thin, the work area is the opposite. Try to keep the number of files in a work area under, let's say, 200. I've seen work areas take 1 to 2 minutes to load just because someone had the entire contents of their project copied out or signed out into their work area. Remember that you only need to check out what you intend to work on. Let Adept handle all the relationships and extra files you'll need. That's its job. If the users are worried about someone else changing a file before they can finish working on it, consider a simple workflow that states that the originator is the only reviewer. This allows them to check in a partially complete file, saving it for later, where it's safe and easily retrieved when needed, but protecting from unexpected access. Also, if you can't keep all the files you're working on checked into Adept, keep your work separated a little bit into multiple work areas, say by project. Adept has no issues also maintaining relationships between work areas, so it should help you find what you're looking for when you need it. If you've ever used File Explorer to manually enter a path, then you've messed it up at least once. The very moment you hit enter, you're already wishing there was a take-back button. Oh, I know it's engineering, not wengineering, but you have to wait for Windows to realize it's wrong, so it sits there and spins and spins and spins before you can try again. Well, Adept runs on Windows. So every time it goes out and it has to find a work area and the path isn't there anymore, spin, spin, spin. As a user, the fix is easy. Look for the missing work area mark and either fix it or remove it. Now, we all know this could be a bit more difficult, though, when we have users who are no longer using the system. Once again, hearing the call to action, we created the option for an administrator to show you the work areas for all user accounts that have been disabled. Inside the screen, we allow you to deal with any files the user still has ownership of, and to our point here, remove the work area is no longer needed. Something that falls between the last idea of work areas and the libraries we just discussed is missing vaults. The same premise applies to a vault when Adept tries to look for a vault that's no longer in use. or was added automatically but intentionally when creating new libraries back before 2017. The system has to pause while Windows confirms that the location is no longer available. So please take the time to clean up anything in your system that you know is not really there anymore. Missing work areas, missing vaults, empty, or even libraries containing records to files that have long since been removed from Adept but are still sitting on the server. Or vice versa, are still showing in Adept but have been removed the other way. Okay. So talk about a few things that are options in Adept that we can change to change how performance works. While we've managed to speed up our searches extensively over the past few years, there's still a setting that can increase your result speeds even further once you have a handle on how your users are searching. SQL has all kinds of magic it does to accomplish this to a point. But by setting a field to index, you tell SQL to increase the priority of any searching done using that field. And those fields should be giving more resources and priority when they're used for searching. The information you need to have in hand before we make this choice is what fields your users are using regularly. So while you're interviewing your users for fields they don't use to make things better over in your data card, find out which ones they use often, either in the data card or quick search. Unless they only use file name, which is indexed by default, and if that's the case, once more, let's take a look at your metadata together and see how we can improve that to get them using more of the tools we have at hand. You can add 1 to 15 fields as indexed. This is a hard limit because the more fields you have more indexed, the more resources are being demanded from the server. So it probably doesn't make sense to allow 20 or 30 of them to be indexed and have them all basically running at the same as they would have if you'd only done none of them. Introduced back in 2017, this option helps reduce the amount of chatter that Adept places on the network as, oh, hello. And I can't find a mouse. There it is. If that was critically important, pretend you didn't see it. Sorry, where was I? So introduced back in 2017, this option helps reduce the amount of chatter that Adept places on the network, as well as reduce the number of times it has to phone home just to see if the current process has completed. By keeping a record of how long the last few commands you issued took, we are better able to guess the typical response time for those commands. So if a check-in of one file typically takes 5 seconds, rather than constantly polling the server to see if it's ready for the next piece of data, we wait the expected 5 seconds before trying again. As locations become more and more spread out and latency increases as we move more and more applications to hosted environments, this kind of efficiency can not only help Adept perform better, but also free up bandwidth for other applications. Now here's one of those places I'm going to admit that I'm human. If you've been using Adept for more than a couple years, and I'm chagrined to say, especially if I did your install, go find this option in your options found under the admin tool, ask me later, I'll remind you where it was because I forgot to write it down here even. It's just these dots telling me I should fill that in. Most likely you want to turn it off. Due to a systemic misunderstanding of what this option meant, it was often enabled on many systems erroneously. What this little guy actually does is every time a file arrives in Adept, it pulls up a list of every file that's missing a child and asks it if it's theirs. So especially for those of you who have those darker corners of your Adept library with all kinds of files that you'll get around to cleaning up someday with all the missing children, this could mean a really large lineup of files that has to ask, is this your child? The local data cache is something that can truly make your day-to-day user experience better for your remote sites. Geared towards clients, I think with 5, and I don't have empirical data for this, I guess around 5 people, or more users in a location that are physically removed from from your database servers. This could include people working on a cloud server or in a centralized network. The local data cache is a collection of core information that every client loads each and every time they log in. By default, each client pulls the database for this information. Things like library name, data card layout, field names, and size and type. This information is saved in the user's cache folder. And with a fast connection to the database, this is almost indistinguishable. This moment is almost indistinguishable. But for our clients that are already seeing slower than desired latency between them and the database, you can create a copy of all these tables local to the users. So each time someone logs in, as long as the data has not changed, the user will collect their information from this pool rather than from all the way back at the database. As well, once the information does change, the first user who logs in will collect that information from the database and then record it to the local session, letting subsequent users collect it from there. Which is why I say you tend to need about 5 users for it, because if you only have 2 or 3, they probably log in around the same time, they realize the data's not updated, and they both run up to the database and ask what's going on. Coming back to work areas one last time, one thing that every user feels acutely is the delay getting to the files they need to work on. Understanding this, we recently added an option to limit the amount of work Adept has to do up front when you log in. By disabling Verify Work Area on login, Adept no longer checks every work area or even the default one when you first log in. Now, of course, nothing comes for free. Where you will see the time being used now is when you change work areas. Each swap will require Adept to confirm accessibility to and the contents of the work area. So if you switch work areas often or only have a few of them, you may not want to set this. I feel horrible that I'm like looking down the whole time, so I'm sorry for that. There, I think I've used all my Canadian words.
Jeff, Bernard. With the remove older version and archive audit trail, is that something available in 2017 SP3? I noticed it was 2018 on your slide.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So actually the archive audit trail, almost everything that I covered here except for the specific options has been in the designer for quite a while. So it is something we could definitely look at doing.
Okay.
Yep. Ryan.
So, as an admin, I'm going through and I'm doing my regular old maintenance procedure. I'm just giving her. Is there and there maybe something exists and I'm just ignorant to it? Is there a document that exists that outlines a lot of these things you've talked about?
No, this is definitely the kind of thing that is a good cross between being an Adept admin long enough and knowing how all the options work together and understanding the systems. So that's probably the biggest reason we wanted to present this, because there's a lot of stuff that we think even as an admin you may never come across unless you've had to do system maintenance or solve problems for people.
So can we get copies of your slide deck? Yeah? Sweet.
Yeah. And of course you can always get a health check.
I was just about to say that. Please say what that is.
Oh, so for sure. So one of the things we've done, and this because it's recurring, not just looking to find something to pad. We have a lot of people who just don't know what's going on with their system, start to finish. They don't have a DBA or they don't have a real systems admin because they were handed Adept and the server it was on as an engineering tool more than a corporate solution. So we come in and we review everything top to bottom. We look at your servers, we look at your Adept performance, we find your pain points, and we try to find the most likely place that there are issues. If we find any of those issues, we will write up our recommendations for what you should do or what you can do to fix them. Here. It's an admin option. So once it's on for everybody. Wait, no, am I wrong? Who knows? Let me find out.
I believe it's a workstation.
800 options in the back of my head, so I apologize if I forget one. No, is it? It's system-wide. Okay, thank you. See, other ACs.
What was the answer?
It is system-wide, so once you turn it off, it doesn't do it for anyone.
Jeff, one observation, you were talking about transaction logs and so forth, and just while it's good to maintain those, point of pain is that when you get ready to do an upgrade, where you're having to upgrade the database, you want to make sure you clean out that transaction log before you start and that you have a large enough allocated space, because it's painful to let the upgrade run for 3 hours and figure out that it's not doing anything else because it's filled up the transaction log.
Right, getting a little more database depth there, yes. If you use SQL and you restore it, it goes through all the transaction logs too and tries to, even though it doesn't need to because you did a full backup, it restores all those as well. That's what you're getting at, right? Is all that time it takes? Yeah.
Jeffrey?
Yes.
So this is probably something I should work with the help desk on, but it came to mind. I've been creating a lot of libraries because everybody wants the product tree in the libraries. And now I'm seeing that's not such a great idea. But lately, every time I've been creating libraries and then doing the writes and everything, Adept stops working. I get the error message and it kind of goes away. Could it be that I'm putting too much in there? I don't think we have a whole lot in there yet.
No. So, yes, I see that happen sometimes too in places. I honestly don't know what causes that. It could be just that volume of writes it's got to go through and recheck each time.
Okay.
I get on my soapbox here. If I've been out somewhere, you know it's a soapbox of mine. You should not, unless you are changing your access control, which means the rights are different here than they are somewhere else, or your workflow, or you're replicating, there is simply no argument you can bring to my table that says I need another library, right?
Okay.
I may want it, but that's what metadata does. And so what you should do is, and if it needs, get us to help you formulate that argument for your team to say, listen, we can do that same thing you're looking for with file guides, with columns, that, and prove it out.
Just to verify, you said when you disable the verify work area, when on the check-in, when you do go to the work area, it does verify it
Correct.
at that point.
Yeah, what'll happen is anytime, like if you, let's say you had a work area on a network drive and you disconnected from the network, you wouldn't know you didn't have it, you wouldn't see that red X until you went to click on it. Or if you'd added new files, it just, I guess it doesn't extract the new files, but whatever it does, the magic that our developers make it do, when it does check a work area, it doesn't do it till you check it. Now, it does that now every time you switch work areas.
Right. Okay, and a follow-up question to that is on the missing children, because we use DGNs, and a lot of our DGNs are old.
Right.
They're there, we have to have them, but in MicroStation, you do a related document. Those documents, those drawings, we don't have anymore. We only have about 500 of those.
Yeah.
If you disable that, does it go back and revalidate that if you go back to that drawing?
So I think what you're saying is if I disable that, if I do something to that drawing, it will go and check for its children. So if I do a refresh all on that file, or if I check that file out, that default behavior of going out and saying, are there children in the system that are mine, that still happens. And that's what I used to think this button did. That's why I would always make sure it was on, because I thought that was saying, yeah, go do a look when you had to change. The only thing this option does is say, when I put a new child in, or a new file of any kind in, go ask everybody that's missing something if this is their child. So unless you're putting files in the system and hoping to go out and fix all the files that are missing children, like if you get, all your drawings are missing logo.jpg, and finally say, great, I found logo.jpg, let's stuff that in the system. If this option is on, then all those files should get fixed because it says, yes, this is the file you were looking for. However, that's not I don't think that happens in most cases. I think most people, when they're putting their files in, they're not hoping to fix old ones. If they're fixing an old one, they've put something in, and then they tell the old ones, go refresh yourself because you may find what you're looking for now. Does that answer what you were getting at? Okay, thank you.
Hi, Jeffrey.
Hello.
The delete empty libraries,
Yes.
does it give you an option, like a pick list? Of ones you can uncheck so it does not wipe them out?
I don't believe there's a checklist. All it gives you is the list of what it's going to do. So you would have to decide whether there was something you didn't want in there and lock it down somehow. No, I don't. Has anyone used it recently? Yeah, I say you throw a dummy file in it to hold it. Like, worst case, but my guess is right now, and I'm going to go and say it this way because I think it's the safest, it will not give you the option to remove it from the list once it's generated it. So use your check libraries, look for empty libraries first and go through that list. If you see any in there that are indicated, you know they're going to get deleted when you run it, as we said. Maybe throw a file in it just to take it out of action.
All right.
Anyone else?
Last question?
For the delete empty libraries, I noticed when I've deleted libraries before, it only deletes it from the library administration, but it does not delete it from the vault. Will it go and delete it from the vault?
It will not, and always trying to be safe on our end, it will still leave the files out on the vault to be cleaned up separately. Other last question.
Yeah, there's 2 more last questions
Okay.
here, and then we'll.
Say, that was pretty much going to be my question is, say a young admin for some reason has a bunch of old file or folders in the vault for miscellaneous minor revisions. What's the safest way to pull all those out?
So if you've got, and hopefully this is, someone will stop me if this isn't working the way I think it does right now. If you're using, you have to be using AFS vaults, so please get to AFS vaults. We want them, they're better, they're awesome. But there's a report you can run in there that finds you every folder or file that's not referenced in the system. And using that report, you can then go back and say, here's everything that says it's not an Adept. Let's get a game plan to get rid of that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Just real quick, I've got a lot of users that are no longer with the company. I've disabled them.
Right.
Should I delete them instead?
Yeah, so what, and again, I'm trying to always get the details. The answer, of course, has been no, has been for a while, because I don't think you lose any information, you just can't search for it anymore. So if you delete the user, if you look at the audit trail, it'll still say that Jeffrey, who we got rid of because he was taking up too much time, it'll put his name in brackets so that you can say, hey, I know that Jeffrey viewed this file. But I believe that the audit trail search, of course, loses that. So you can't then search for and say, hey, what did deleted Jeffrey do last year? What does anyone know what the other major thing is that we don't want them deleting them for? That doesn't seem bad to me. I mean, they're supposed to deal with it. And again, I would tie that one in with the tool we added for the view disabled users work areas, because before you delete them, run that, and that will show you if they own anything. But yeah, I think we should review internally whether deleting really is a foreboding versus just a, hey, know what you're going to deal with.
All right. So Nick, can you stand up as well? So spurred a lot of good questions. If you've got more questions, we're about ready to, well, we'll take a break after. We've got one more session and then a break, so you can find Nick or Jeffrey on your break and go a little bit deeper. But thank you so much, Jeffrey.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, brother.